Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about some of the challenges and practical opportunities for outsourcing logistics in public health supply chains. So I'm joined by Sergio, from the outsourcing lead from the Ministry of Health in Mozambique. I'm joined by Shamit Shah, who's the CEO of Freight in Time, a logistics company in East Africa, and also Scott Dubin from the Global Fund, who's an advisor on the outsourcing and private sector engagement. So we've got representatives from public sector, from private sector, and also from the development sector. And we will have some translation from Esselina from Village Reach at the end there, so thank you so much. We're going to start with a quick presentation from Scott to talk about some of the work he's been doing on outsourcing of logistics, and then we'll hand over to the panel for a discussion. So Scott, over to you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you, and thank you to SAPICS for having us. I'm here to start off to talk a little bit about global goods that we have been working on at the Global Fund and in conjunction with the Gates Foundation. And to set the scene, the way we look at it is the shift that happened when alchemy moved to chemistry and astrology moved to astronomy, allowed for greater precision and understanding. We need a similar shift in terms of outsourcing of logistics, where we have a more structured approach, a better understanding of how it should be done. It will help us move the conversation along further if we formalize our strategies, our processes. We'll improve the likelihood of success and the likelihood of adoption. And so we have two global goods that are connected to that. We'll talk about it a lot more in the panel, but we wanted to share those with you. One of them is the logistics outsourcing guidance. And earlier today, Prashant was talking about firemen and women. And similarly, we often enjoy putting out fires in our industry, but not taking the time to write fire code and ultimately reduce the amount of fires. And so having more content available on outsourcing to make sure everybody's speaking a similar language, has a similar understanding, is needed. There's limited guidance that exists. And so there's something that we've been working on. It is now being put into a website and will be available as a global good. It encompasses a preliminary diagnostic assessment to understand where you are, where you've come from. It has 12 specific steps to walk through in a specific order. And this is all to produce positive outcomes, to be very operationally oriented. The pedagogy of it was very important, not just the content. And what we did is break down the outsourcing process into 12 steps. And you could have done 13 or 11 or so on. But this really helps in understanding what outsourcing is, because I think if you ask 10 different people what it involves, you'd probably get 10 different answers. And it's very helpful to have this because then we can speak as in what order this should happen, where countries are, and where specific technical assistance will be needed. And so that information will be available on our website, and we will share it with everybody as a global good. We expect to update it every year, and we really would appreciate input and make those adjustments every year. There's tools that go along with the narrative, tools, templates that go along with the guidance, and we're always looking to add to those. But you can see we really start from the beginning of understanding your costs and your performance and saying this is really where we should start the conversation on outsourcing, because often this step is skipped, and the first response will be that it's very expensive to outsource. So this is something that we see as very critical, understanding your needs, determining if the market can meet your needs, and then moving into a decision about insourcing or outsourcing and that procurement process. And then we get into the contract management and the renewal. So we hit on all these areas, and we think this is very fundamental to the success of outsourcing. And also for those who are hesitant to outsource, it being helpful for them to see the path and what will be needed, and to have a conversation using similar terms to say where they need help and where they want to be. The other global good is a logistics service provider directory. As I'm sure many of you have experienced, there's a lot of friction in the process to identify logistics providers in our space. You hit the ground, you try to identify them, and it is quite a challenge. And so we have designed, and now we will build it out, a online directory. And because of this is, as I mentioned, that the limited visibility of logistics providers, the lack of comprehensive directories, the high cost of going in and doing assessments to determine who's on the ground and available, and those are just a snapshot in time. Donors often don't have visibility to who's in the market to know if all providers or a large share of providers have been part of the discussion, submitting proposals, being considered for the work. When we have emergencies such as COVID, how do we reach out to different transporters, logistics providers to communicate efficiently? This is often very difficult. So the directory is really to identify local providers, logistics providers, to improve the visibility. And one aspect that we find is very challenging, I'm sure you all understand, is the placement of RFPs. There's not a typical place for logistics providers to put RFPs for governments or implementers to put RFPs that logistics providers will see. Perhaps it's in a local paper, it might not get a lot of visibility or only visibility to entities in that country, not regionally. So we would have RFPs posted on the website so those can respond directly to the RFPs. And they would be posted other places as well, but this would be a chance to increase the interest from the logistics companies to participate. And it will be their job to update their profile. It is their responsibility. There's some directories where an entity will gather information and be updating the profiles, but it is on the logistics provider. And so we think this will really improve access to the market, to streamline the procurement process, and just better engagement overall with the private sector. So this is being built out. As I mentioned, this is the wireframe. We have fully developed the wireframes. We expect to build it out over the next few months. We plan to roll it out in East Africa. And we need, on both sides, the logistics providers and the users, who would be the governments, the implementers, and even the private sector who also utilizes logistics services. So we'd be very interested to engage with the private sector to talk about, before we finalize the design, ensuring that they also feel comfortable. We've worked with Shamit and his firm to get their input, but we would like to gather other inputs from other logistics providers to make sure it's capturing what they would want to share with potential customers. And we've done a lot of work with other entities who would be users of the system, such as the Global Fund, USAID, Gavi, UNICEF, WFP, and so on. So with that, I will hand it back over to Katrina, and we can start our panel. But thank you very much.
I'm sure there are many logistics companies sitting in the room wondering why we have to have a slightly different process for doing what would seem like a standard outsourcing activity. And I think one of the differentiators that's quite important is the difference between private to private outsourcing and private to public. And that's when you start to see some of the challenges because of the requirements of engaging with government, contracting with government. And I think one of the points Scott's made about having a good understanding of what your actual costs are. So my background is in pharmaceutical supply chains, and we always outsourced our logistics because we manufactured, we did the research. And when I was doing this for Africa and the Middle East, we had the same problem. In a big multinational pharmaceutical company, we didn't know how much money we were spending on logistics. So we ended up in a situation where we sent out a good old Excel spreadsheet to every single country in the world for them to tell us what their warehouse size was, what they were spending on logistics, and how many people they had working in the warehouses before we could start to do that optimization. Anyway, now I hand over to the people who can give you a little bit more insight. So outsourcing is a big topic. We definitely won't do it justice today, but please do reach out to the people you see on the stage afterwards if you've got any questions. Shamit, I'm going to start with you. So we had a heated conversation in our minibus last night.
Already.
Within public health, we've seen some big improvements in procurement, driven by PEPFAR, the Global Fund. So total transformation in the availability of commodities, but the transformation in logistics has been much slower. So Shamit, what would you like to see differently, or what are some of the things you think could actually drive that transformation?
All right. Is that on? Yeah, good. Hello, good evening. So honestly, we've been on a journey. So maybe give you a little bit of background about Freight and Time. We're a logistics and I would say 5PL supply chain company in East Africa. We're the UPS supply chain contractor in East Africa for the last 20 years. And as a result, when PEPFAR started, we were the first guinea pigs that ever handled the first PEPFAR shipments. And that transformed what was happening in the whole health chain, in the public health supply chain. And it was revolutionary at that time. We had to fight, I can tell you about, nobody knew how to handle the taxes and exemptions and what happened with the VAT, and we went through nightmares. And over the years, we learned what happened in public health as Freight and Time. We were on the ground, we were the guys actually delivering the goods in 9 countries to Ministry of Health. And it was not easy, if I can tell you. And Ian was part of the pioneers of that whole process. And these guys created something incredible. It was the first innovation we saw in public health space in years. Today, 20 years on, we haven't moved much. We have Global Fund, and that's great. So now the pool procurement was a great story, but it's still upstream. All of that is upstream logistics, and it's got much, much better. And now, in 2016 or 2017, we had so as Freight and Time, when Chemonix won the contract for PEPFAR and UPS lost the contract, it was for us like a wake-up moment. Can we control our own destiny? Can we do something that's different? Because relying on upstream partners is great when things are good. So at that point, Freight and Time, we said we need to see how we use what we know with our footprint, and can we develop something better? And by good luck or good timing or just coincidence, it was when the focus has moved to last mile distribution. Because getting products into a country, spending billions of dollars, and then it doesn't get to where it's supposed to get to, how crazy is that? And so we started doing that last mile distribution. We started in Uganda, now in Ethiopia, we're moving to Rwanda, and that's where the focus is moving. And I believe that's where the focus needs to be.
Sergio, there has been increase in outsourcing of logistics for governments across the world, but progress has still been slow. But you're one of the countries who've managed to crack that nut. Would you like to share some of the challenges that you've experienced in outsourcing logistics in Mozambique?
Ok. Bom, boa tarde a todos. Dizer que a terceirização em Moçambique trouxe muitos ganhos. É uma revolução para nós, comparativamente ao que fazíamos antes da terceirização.
So, doing the translation, so he's saying that outsourcing transport in Mozambique brought a lot of revolution in the country, in supply chain.
Comparando o cenário atual, hoje em dia nós conseguimos fazer uma cobertura de 1.900 unidades sanitárias a entregar medicamentos e vacinas de forma integrada.
So actually now with the outsourcing transport, they can integrate the distribution, healthy products and vaccines in almost 1,800 healthy facilities.
E estes ganhos, com certeza, que têm sido muito bem-vindos, porque temos sempre o apoio dos nossos parceiros E o maior ganho que nós tivemos é o engajamento do setor público-privado naquelas que são as nossas dificuldades.
The big value add of the strategy implemented in the country was the partnership, the collaboration between the public sector and the public sector.
Antes da terceirização, nós fazíamos a distribuição de forma muito precária, porque não tínhamos viaturas, não tínhamos viaturas com capacidade, não tínhamos viaturas apropriadas para fazer a distribuição em zonas de difícil acesso.
So before outsourcing, the country had the issue like no vehicles available, vehicles with no capacity for the volume of commodities they want to transport.
Mas hoje, graças à terceirização, mesmo em zonas de difícil acesso, temos tido a oportunidade de ter meios alternativos para distribuir medicamentos.
So now with outsourcing, they can achieve all the health facilities, even those that are at the last mile and with the worst condition to be achieved.
E pela primeira vez, associada à terceirização, Moçambique vai introduzir um curso de licenciatura em logística.
So now the country is also developing a curriculum for logistics for health to also cover this outsourcing transport implementation in the country.
E dizer que também, graças a esta terceirização, conseguimos integrar as vacinas e medicamentos para serem entregues em todas as unidades sanitárias, ou seja, até a última milha.
So now also emphasizes that the integration of health products with vaccines was achieved with outsourcing transport implementation in the country.
Porque é um ganho muito bom para o país. Neste momento existem técnicos do nível central que estão a ser formados. Há uma transição de passagem de conhecimentos, há uma formação em otimização de rotas.
So now in the country they are in the transition process where the knowledge that they acquire with their partners and the private sector, all these competence skills are being passed to the government side to ensure the ownership of this process.
E volto a frisar que o mais importante é que haja uma abertura, é que haja uma união e haja maior engajamento do setor público-privado, porque o setor privado tem quadros qualificados, tem experiência e pode muito bem apoiar o governo e continuarmos neste processo.
So he says that the collaboration between the public and the private sector needs to continue to make sure the strategy continues to improve and achieve the last mile.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. And I guess back to my introductory point that there are differences between private engaging with private and private engaging with public. So Shamit, again, what have been some of the challenges that you've faced as a private sector engaging with public sector that's different to when you're engaging with private sector?
Everything Sergio said resonates because it's about trust. Public sector doesn't trust private sector, right? And yet, private sector, it actually goes both ways. You're absolutely right. It does go both ways. And so you've got to build trust. I call it my triangle, right? You have the donors, and you've got your donors at the bottom, you've got Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance on one of the triangles, and then your private sector on the other side. You've got to make that triangle work. And everything Sergio said was absolutely spot on. You have parallel supply chains. It's mad when you deliver 3 times because you've got USAID, Gavi, and Global Fund delivering products to the same place. So there are simple efficiencies out there. It's not rocket science. And so when you build that trust and you show that you can do this, and 9 times out of 10 you do it cheaper than what public sector does it for, but they don't cost it right? If you run a truck and you have a driver, you have the same fuel. You have to pay the driver. So most of your fixed costs are exactly the same. But if you can just manage your routes, plan it better, you end up with efficiencies. And the last thing is, when we look at Africa, we've grown. You know, demand has grown, but within our infrastructure, the infrastructure has not grown. So our warehouses are not capable of managing. You know, people demand, so we're trying to deal with a 40-year-old infrastructure that cannot manage what we are trying to deliver. So you need private sector, because private sector has capacity. Private sector can deliver. Private sector is accountable.
Thank you. And Scott, coming to the third part of that triangle, what are you doing within the Global Fund or within the development sector more broadly to address some of the specific challenges raised by the other members of the panel?
Yeah, thank you. I think one, it's tied to the graphic I was showing earlier, is really understanding the challenges governments are going to face as they outsource. First, all that's involved in outsourcing, and then how would they make all of that work? And the concern would be that we suggest outsourcing or we support outsourcing, but without any really detailed support. And they move forward with outsourcing, it doesn't go well, and then they don't want to do it. And ultimately for us, it is what do we need to attend to in detail to make it more likely for them to, one, succeed, or want to move forward towards outsourcing. And so we really see quite a variety of areas where there's challenges related to outsourcing for governments, and we need to understand those and create solutions for those. I shared 2 global goods that address some of the issues, but there's a lot more challenges to be addressed. And I think it's very important as we move forward. I sit at a donor and try to remind the donor that we can't expect governments to outsource in the way that implementers have outsourced. It doesn't work that way. They don't have the same number of people, the same technical know-how, the same resources. And so it's for us to think about how can we reduce the level of effort, the technical know-how to implement outsourcing. What type of systems, processes, tools need to be available, tested, and shared with governments to say this will reduce the level of effort and technical know-how to make it work. And we haven't really done that. Though, as Shamit was saying, not a lot has changed. We're not drastically changing how we've outsourced logistics services over the years. But this is the time to make that change because we're shifting who is going to be doing that work. And so since the model won't work that we've had going through implementers, we need to start finding solutions that fit well for governments to succeed in outsourcing.
So back to you then, Sergio. Trust. That's an easy word to say, a very difficult thing to do. What are some of the practical things that you found helpful in Mozambique in terms of building that trust and strengthening that relationship between your government and private sector?
Bom, para que houvesse mais confiança, como dizia o colega aqui ao lado, é que nem o setor privado confiava no setor público, nem o setor público confiava no setor privado. Então, foi preciso olhar para aquele que é o ganho para todo o país. Nós temos Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so he was saying that, as Dr. said, that there is, in the beginning, the public doesn't trust the private sector, and the private sector didn't trust the public sector. So, to start building this trust, please.
Foi preciso encontrar, olhar para aquele que seria o bem para todo o país, que é olhar para a população, que é olhar para os doentes, que é olhar para todas as unidades sanitárias.
So the first thing, they defined a strategy where both public and private sector aligned that the goal is to beneficiate the public in the country, the last mile, all the people that go to the health facility.
Então, se temos vários parceiros a apoiarem o governo em áreas diferentes, por que não juntar e fazermos num comando único?
So they have a lot of partners inside the country. So the first thing the government was thinking about that, why don't put all these players together and define a unique command by the government to make sure they follow the same route.
Obrigado.
Okay, thank you. Same question to you, Shamit, but I'm interested to know what strategies you specifically found to be the most helpful or successful, or if you want to share some strategies that absolutely didn't work, that would be great too.
Many. I think you've got to simplify the process. So as a small company, to be able to try and contract with a USAID or a global fund, you need crazy resources. And we don't have them. And, you know, there's this whole new localization policy. I think it's fantastic. I think it's the right way to go because it's sustainable. But you can't actually go, most of those contracts are way out of our reach because you can't even just do the paperwork, the red tape. So we've got to simplify how we manage this process. We've got to simplify how this works. And as the private sector, you know, when I work for my commercial clients, you deliver from A to B, and you're paid for it. So it's not complicated. We should keep it as simple as that and keep, you know, that whole process as simple as possible.
So back to you there, Scott. What advice would you give to logistics service providers who are interested in playing a role in outsourcing for public sector supply chains?
I should have mentioned it earlier as well, that we don't simply look at the governments and what they need to do to make outsourcing work. We have to think about the private sector and what they need to be good providers to governments. And so that's certainly part of the conversation. We talk about a lack of trust, and I think it's important we try to understand what's the root of that issue. And the way I would liken it is similar to me going to visit the mechanic to fix my car. I have a lack of trust in him to be giving me the right information because there's an asymmetry in the information that he holds versus what I hold. And I don't know. I don't have anything to benchmark it against. And so that industry knew that was a problem, and so they've started to be much more transparent with their pricing and information. And it's still an issue. Everybody feels uncomfortable going to a mechanic, but this is something that they are trying to address, but it's certainly similar in this case where governments have less information on how to manage the service they are contracting for. And that creates a very difficult dynamic. So my suggestion to the private sector is, one, to recognize that and figure out what type of information can be shared with governments in terms of case studies, in terms of metrics, in terms of more transparency in pricing. This will likely improve the issues around trust. And it connects to what I was speaking about earlier, is what do we provide to governments to make them more likely to take this journey of outsourcing, to feel confident to do it. And if we have both those sides being addressed, I think we'll more likely have less issues with trust, more likelihood of success as we move forward. But it is certainly a tough nut to crack, but just both sides need to be addressed. And I think we work more closely with governments, and I think we don't always have the voice of the private sector to let us know what do they need to know, what don't they understand, and sometimes it's as simple as who do I engage with at the government to support them, how do I apply for complicated RFPs and so on. So I think we need to do a better job with helping the private sector to be prepared to respond to the needs of governments and implementers.
So I'm going to just do one extra question and put you on the spot, Scott. We talked about the triangle, so not just two sides, three sides in our complex development sector. Is there anything specifically you think that the development sector can do to simplify some of the complexity that the private sector experience when responding to some of these complexities?
Well, I would love to be able to fix government procurement. I tried when I was at USAID and didn't work out so well. But I think that is certainly an area that needs to be addressed, and there's lots of complications to government procurements, and you need compliance people who understand that, and most organizations don't have that type of resource. But I think one really important area that we often don't talk about is how governments feel about how private sector feels about engaging with governments when there is uncertainty about payment. And we don't talk about this enough. Also, their comfort level with engaging with the government if there's concerns around fraud. And so around payment, we talk a lot about innovative financing related to the procurement of product, but we're not talking about it in relation to the procurement of services. And we should think about how credit should be given to either governments or the logistics providers to address this issue, because we can do a lot of work around making governments familiar with outsourcing, giving them technical assistance that we haven't given them before to make them up to speed with outsourcing and be able to manage it. But if we don't figure out the payment for services, then it will all be for naught. And so I think we should do these together and not do one and then wait for the other, because they're key issues that are related to each other.
So I think that ties into the last question for everybody, which is about the sustainability. I know it's a magic word and ill-defined, but what do we think? I think, Sergio, starting with you, what do you think needs to be done to ensure the sustainability and maybe the more rapid transformation of governments in going down the outsourcing route? What would you recommend to other governments who are considering this option?
Bom, como recomendação para a implementação da terceirização, eu diria que o passo mais importante é o engajamento do setor público-privado. Depois deste engajamento, criar mais parcerias, porque o governo sozinho não vai conseguir fazer, mas se criar mais engajamento, criar mais parcerias, pode conseguir ir avante com o processo de terceirização, que é um ganho para o próprio governo. Então,
So he's saying the first big step is the engagement between all the players in the country, the private sector, the partners, the donors, and the government. This is the first step to start to achieve the outsourcing transport success.
E tem que haver mais confiança e transparência de todas as partes e olhar para o bem comum.
So then, you need to implement strategy that will ensure transparency at all the process of the implementation of the solution.
Thank you.
So,
okay. Same question to you then, Shamit.
So, I mean, how do you say it? The ship has sailed. This is happening. Localization is going to happen. It's not a choice. Congress has actually put that into law. So that means we need to come to terms with that. And we need to come to terms with how we're going to make it happen. We have some incredible case studies where we've done stuff in Uganda and Ethiopia as PPPs, where we've increased on-shelf availability from 45% to 95%, but at the same time, brought the cost down from 85 cents a kilometer to 50. That's what private sector can do. So I think it's a one-way street. We've just got to work out how to make this happen.
And what advice would you give to somebody who's considering going down that partnership route? So another private sector organization. What are the things to avoid?
It's exactly what Scott said. You need to know who's out there. What's your landscape? Who are the players who are capable of doing this? And there's a lot of people out there. I mean, we have private sector logistics partners in every country in Africa. They just don't play in this space. So it's up to us to make them come into this space.
Thank you. And Scott?
Yeah, I think we have a history of providing technical assistance to governments around the management of their warehouses and their fleet and distribution. And we found it to be quite challenging because of very high turnover within governments, and it really relied on people versus specific systems and technologies where know-how was more permanent. And I think we need to take some lessons learned from that for how we train up on the outsourcing of logistics, and maybe rely a little bit less on specific training of individuals, while that's certainly important, but what type of technologies and systems that we can bring to this work that haven't and are not currently being utilized, but make sense in our industry to reduce that level of effort and reduce the technical know-how that will be less impacted by government churn. And so I think how we support the move to outsourcing, we should be mindful of its sustainability, and I think that requires us as donors to be testing a variety of equipment, supporting our technologies and systems, and supporting those testing and sharing those lessons learned, not gatekeeping any of that information. And I think that is one of the elements that will be critical to this being a more sustainable effort as we move to outsourcing.
So I know that Shamit's got some case studies if anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about the work that Freight in Time have done. But I think one of the things that's come across in a lot of the sessions we've talked about is the importance of lessons learned. And often when you're at a conference, you'll hear the good stories and you won't necessarily understand some of the challenges. So I think in terms of like listening to you speak, I think it would be really interesting to find a way to pull some of those lessons learned together so that other governments or private sector organizations that are going on this journey can leapfrog some of the knowledge that you've been able to gain. And I think the other thing that came across as well, again, similarly to other challenges, is the importance of creating solutions that tackle the supply chain logistics challenges, as well as recognizing that they will require some sort of innovative financing solution, in this case for services. So I think, again, common themes that we've known from other parts of the supply chain, but maybe haven't addressed in the same way in logistics. And I cannot believe it, but we actually have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to see if anyone in the audience actually has a question for anyone on the panel. Do we have a microphone? Just for this lady at the front.
Thank you very much, panel. It was a very interesting discussion. My name is Angelina Komba. I'm from Village Reach, and my question goes to Scott. And thank you very much, Scott. You said something very important. How can we reduce government LOA? We know about high employee turnaround within the government, and now we're talking about outsource, and maybe you said something like one of the solutions start to really talk about how can we use outsource, how to use technology to effectively manage outsource. So I'm thinking, may require high significant, upfront investment, and as a donor, do you think that it's an area where most of the donors are ready to fund?
That is a great question. I think there isn't consistency yet across donors in thinking of how to address this outsourcing, but it's something that we're spending more time focusing on, and as we develop global goods, the Global Fund and the Gates Foundation are communicating with USAID and trying to have a more consistent approach, with the thinking being that if we can all be on the same page as to what areas need to be addressed, we could divide and conquer in terms of what we want to each attend to and share that information. I think what's really critical is coming to agreement on what the challenges are, because that will help us understand what type of technologies and systems we need. And so, for example, if we know governments will have challenges with contracting, we think about the utilization of contract management software. If they have difficulty in managing the vast amounts of paperwork and admin processes because they just don't have enough people, business process outsourcing might be something that's suitable. If it's very challenging to take up a lot of bandwidth to manage the contracting with many different transport providers, potentially the use of online logistics marketplaces are available. And these are not new out there technologies. I don't want to say like a drone because it's not even as new anymore, but these are things that are commonly used in other industries, and we just haven't brought them over into our industry. So I don't think it will be such a stretch to have donors support these type of systems because they're not a huge financial commitment to make them work. It's just how do we use them intelligently for the government need.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we just get a few closing comments then from the panelists. Sergio, anything else that you didn't get an opportunity to share that you'd like to share with the audience?
I'm
Good.
okay.
Shamit?
No, I think it's been a good session. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else from you, Scott?
Just that we really would like to engage with the private sector quite a bit on the global goods that we mentioned, especially the logistics service provider directory. We have a lot of interest in getting your input. We rely on the private sector to make it successful. It's supposed to benefit you as well, and so we would like to continue the conversation in that area, and as well on the outsourcing guidance. This should make it easier for governments to engage the private sector, and happy to hear input from the private sector, so happy to connect offline. But thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to you.